The Eurovision Song Contest.
Eurovision Song Contest.
Eurovision Song Contest.
Eurovision Song Contest.
This has always been an extraordinary event, marked by amazing displays of campness and really kitsch outfits and bizarre lyrics and staging.
I see a star,
And yet, despite the fact that it is regularly lampooned, particularly by musicians and by critics, it brings together so many people all over Europe. It's this, huge, great family, light entertainment fest.
underground, overground, wombling free.
And there's nothing really like it in the world. It's like this enormous, celebratory, bizarre camp thing that everyone indulges in once a year. And its origins go back to the 1950s, when it was devised in the days of really quite primitive technology as a way of hooking up the whole of Europe in the post-war environment.
Women have shown what they could do in war, and now that the fighting is over, women intend to show the world what they can do in peace.
Where there was a desire to, in the Cold War, there was a desire to bring together the nations of Europe, and we can all enjoy finding some kind of sense of common humanity in a song contest. These grand post-war ideas. That was the era in which the Eurovision Song Contest was born. So let's turn our attention to a particular event in the Eurovision history, and it's so long ago that I can barely remember it myself, and I'm quite old, but we're going back to 1974. This was a defining year in the Eurovision history because of the emergence of a new supergroup and a pop phenomenon, the great Swedish group ABBA. So you got Katie Boyle fronting the show in what looks like a dressing gown with a sort of feather boa. The British contestant that evening was Olivia Newton-John, who's sadly died recently. And Olivia Newton-John was not British, she was Australian. Nevertheless, there she was in a very 70s outfit, performing a rather strange song.
When you feel the spirit move ya.
Which didn't do especially well. Other events of the evening were much more disturbing. This particular candidate from the Netherlands is worth looking at.
Till the end of time.
The reason for the deeply sinister doll is known only to the producer of the song. So it was in this curious early 70s environment that ABBA emerged onto the stage. So for this brief presentation, I should say something about the song. Why was Waterloo so extraordinary as a song? Well, amidst all the rather kind of weary, not terribly exciting song material that was surrounding it, Waterloo pinged out like this marvellous, charismatic thing. And it had this terrific swing. It kicks off with that kind of jig-like rhythm, swung jig-like rhythm. A few weeks ago we did a video about Beethoven's Opus 111 Piano Sonata, the famous boogie-woogie variation. Now, I'm not drawing any analogy between that piece and this, except that both works have this sort of dance vitality, and it's immediate, it's foot-tappingly exciting. And as soon as the band come in this kind of curious Swedish-English lyric, so you got this dun-da-dun-da-dun-da, my, just off the beat, and always swung just ahead of the beat, so everything's syncopated. You have this my, and then Benny and Bjorn go bam, bam, so you get that sort of antiphonal call and response. And then at Waterloo, so everything's ahead of the beat. Do you notice that second chord? That's completely unexpected. You'd expect that, the normal subdominant chord or something like that. It's a sharpened chord, what we call a Lydian chord, with the fourth note of the scale turned upwards. And when you do that, you're pulling the harmony away. Straight away, you're pulling the harmony upwards and away from the tonic, which is D, towards A. And that's where we go next. And there's another factor here which is curious, this Napoleonic topic. The original conductor who was standing in front of the stage, I'm not actually sure what he was there for except to conduct the saxophones, but he was dressed as Napoleon. And the line in the lyric is, Napoleon did surrender, oh yeah, so second verse, and I have met my destiny in quite a similar way. And then Benny plays these sort of concerto-like, very classical, cadenza-like patterns in B minor. And then we get the line that the history book on the shelf, second cadenza is always repeating itself. Waterloo, ahead of the beat again, the Waterloo chorus coming in. What on earth is this all about? The history book on the shelf is always repeating itself. Well, perhaps it's a reference to Edmund Burke, who had once said that those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. But it could equally be a reference to Karl Marx, who'd written in 1853 that history repeats itself first as tragedy and then as farce, a very famous quote. And you might think to yourself, well, what has ABBA got to do with that? Well, Marx was writing his essay about Napoleon, the tragedy being Napoleon's defeat and the failure of France in 1815, and history repeating itself in the 1850s with the emergence of his ludicrous nephew, Louis Napoleon, as leader of France. So that's the farce. Did Bjorn and Benny know about this essay of Karl Marx? I don't know. It seems in some curious way as if they did, because the song is about the defeat of Napoleon. So here are Benny and Bjorn apparently referring to Karl Marx subversively in the lyrics of their hit song Waterloo. Something to think about when you're next listening to this extraordinary and charismatic hit. And what I will say to finish is that ABBA, they navigate this territory between kitsch and songwriting genius in a most extraordinary way. I can't think of any other group quite like them from that respect. I suppose Queen a little bit, but really the poppiness of ABBA and the consistent songwriting talent that they display, and of course performing charisma, is really something to celebrate. So there's a few thoughts about 1974 and the glory days of Eurovision.